There's a couple of side issues that I knew that they all wanted, so. Yeah, but if I didn't come in with those, I probably would have gone.
Yeah, you get kicked out the door, yeah.
But Jay's, so he tends to work. This rotation, he'll be leaving Thanksgiving, and Christmas, but I can't wait till everybody figures out this one, so.
So you'll have to see later food.
How's your mom feeling?
She's doing so good.
That's what Jimmy was telling me.
Really
Jimmy
good.
Jackson.
Yes.
Good. I don't know what that usually says, but.
Yeah, she's great. I'm having to make her sit down. She can just go to the bathroom by herself and no walker, no nothing.
So she can do weight bearing, you know?
Well, and she's limping on it and trying to, not lean on it. But she said it really doesn't hurt. She'll take a tramadol. Just because up here it kind of starts getting achy. But she's not, like, as soon as she feels it, she's taking it, like every 6 hours. Yeah, but I mean, other than that, she hasn't taken the strong one. She's trying not to.
Yeah.
So she's really hoping it doesn't kick in tonight. They said probably about 36 hours when the nerve block will wear off, which is about 9 or 10 tonight. So I told her to text me if she needs me to come home or anything, because I left her all wrapped and iced and all that stuff. So
I hope it's not bad.
thank you.
Mine too.
Probably till Friday. She's got PT in the morning. That'll be probably sore, so and people have been so great.
How's your mama?
She's doing really good.
She'll be jumping.
I know. She said, I'm coming out. Don't let me, but I know you're not going to let me.
Do that. Then we'll clear the room for sure, probably.
Sorry, picture of that.
Yes.
How's she doing?
She's doing really good. I'm trying. You let me. People have been bringing food. It means so good. I don't have to do a lot. Family all good?
Doing all right?
Yeah. Good. He left his phone at home.
It hurts when you run in the trailer, hit you on a truck right in the middle of your shin bone. One of those shin getters. And holding a camera and a lens too. I've got a big industrial.
She's doing really well. Really good. Not a lot of swelling and not too much pain so far. So, yes. Let her. Yes. So I'll tell her you asked. I didn't know if I was going to come tonight, but she's doing great.
Come on down. Sure.
At least they've been through it with dad, so.
Yes. Yes, that's right. I didn't get to come when he had his, so I'm glad I got to come this time.
Yeah, not for her sake, in case she does something. And Stephanie has got. She's gonna be there at 7, which is. All this stuff ready.
It's time for us to get started. It's 7 o'clock. We are on the last part of chapter 10, the lesson over information. And what we'll plan on doing is trying to wrap this one up this evening, and then it'll just be one more lesson for Wednesday night after this. Move on to new teachers and new classes. But it's good to have Neil back with us tonight. It seems like he's doing better, making some improvements. We're going to ask him at this time if he would to lead us in opening prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the opportunity we have tonight to come together to study your word and study these things
about science that helps to support our belief in our God and His creation. All about the wonderful power that He has to create and to create us as human beings. And all these things are so good that will support our faith, believe in our God. We pray for all of those that are unable to be here today. Pray for Susan that she'll get better, feel well. Pray for Phil that he will be able to get up and start walking again and start feeling better. And all the others that are suffering from health problems, that you'll bless them and help them gain their strength and their health. Pray that you'll forgive us of our sins and help us to remain faithful and dedicated to you with all of our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Glad you could join us.
Me too.
Right. As we just mentioned, we're wrapping up chapter 10 tonight. This chapter over information. The lessons over information are part of that greater topic of intelligent design that we've been talking about for several weeks. And that's that idea that we can see design in the universe. You can look at the universe and tell that things are not chaotic. They're not haphazard, but they do have a design and a pattern to them. And when you have a design, then you have to have a designer. When something has that design, it didn't happen by accident. It's something that had to be planned out and designed by an intelligent being. Now we know who that intelligent being is. We know what the Hebrew writer wrote over in Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4, that designer, that builder, that creator is God. Hebrews 3 and verse 4 says, "For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God." Now that's hard to misunderstand, isn't it? That's one of those verses you'd have to have a little help to misunderstand. It's very plain. God is our creator. God is the designer. He is the builder. We talk about the name of this book, Behold the Builder. It is actually talking about God, the creator of the universe. Now we're looking at, in chapter 10, the role that information plays in this idea of intelligent design and the evidence of intelligent design. So one thing that we need to understand is anytime we find information in the universe, when we find that information, then the information can always be tracked back to an intelligent source. It had to come from an intelligent being, had to come from a mental source. It didn't come from something that was inanimate. It didn't come from a rock. It didn't come from just matter. But it had to come from an intelligent source when we see this information in nature. Now we used a couple of examples last week, and one of them was if we had the cup, had 6 marbles in it and 3 red blocks, and you dump that cup out, what would happen? Well, you would have a random assortment, a random placement of those items. If you put them back in the cup, you dump them out again, you'd have a different random assortment. And however many times you did that, the likelihood of you getting it exactly the same any 2 times is almost impossible. But if you were to go in and look on that same tabletop and you see this placement, you see this arrangement, well, you would immediately know that wasn't something somebody just poured out of the cup. We see a design, we see a pattern there. And that's what we've been talking about so far when it comes to the intelligent design, things we can see. But we also talked about last week that also carries some information in that exact pattern. When we see the 3 dots, 3 dashes, and 3 dots, that's Morse code, isn't it? That's Morse code. That is the Morse code for SOS, which is that international distress signal. Okay? So not only do we see a pattern, we see a design, but we also have information encoded in that design. And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, is the information that we find in the design that God has made. And we find information in a lot of places. Certainly we don't have nearly enough time to cover all that. Any comments or any questions from anybody before we move on? Okay.
That's good comment.
Speak up. Okay. So when we see design that conveys information, it has to also originate with an intelligent source. If design originates with an intelligent source, then design along with information would necessarily have to come from an intelligent source. Also, of course, we recognize that source as being God. Now, as we began to talk about information last week, we're kind of focusing mainly on the human body and the information that's encoded in the human body. And we talked a little bit about the example of the brain last week and what an amazing thing the human brain is.
They're singing their songs tonight.
Lee.
Oh, does anybody need a book? Anybody else? Okay. Chapter 10, we're around page 131. But we're talking about the brain and how amazing that the human brain is. Our brain capacity is one of the things, certainly not the only thing, but one of the things that separates us from the animals around us. The animals on this world, it gives us some amazing abilities that we kind of take for granted. You know, a lot of times because our brain is so efficient in some of the things that it does, but it allows us to think, okay? It allows us to reason, to make decisions. I wonder how many decisions we make in a day. You know, there's no telling how many that we actually make in a day if we started counting them. And a lot of them we make without even thinking about them. But our brain is doing that, it's constantly working. We make those decisions based on past events. We're able to, as we mentioned last week, project future events with a pretty high accuracy. Some of the things that we know will happen if I do this. If I do that, what will happen? And we can be pretty accurate on some of those things. It allows us to create, have that artistic ability that we see in a lot of people who are very creative, to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. And also we talked about being able to weigh our options. You know, we're able to do that with our brain. And the example we used was, what are you going to do if somebody cuts you off in traffic? You going to lay on that horn, or what are you going to do? What might happen? You know, nothing might happen. And again, you pull up at the next stoplight, he might pull out a gun and shoot you. You know, what are your options? You know, let's weigh those options before we take action. And our brain allows us to do that. Now, we recognize that the brain ability far exceeded those of the animals we talk about. It has an amazing amount of storage capacity. Our brains, even those of us that aren't as smart as the rest of y'all, has an amazing amount of storage capacity. The author quotes Carl Sagan from his book, The Cosmos. And even Carl Sagan, being an atheist, recognized this. He said the brain is a very big place in a very small space, which is absolutely true. 20 million? Yeah, 20 million volumes. So the brain holds the equivalent of 20 million books. We can store that much information in our brain. And it's just a wonderful thing.
You know, I didn't know I was that smart. I'm not.
I understand. I can relate. But it comes pre-programmed with a lot of things, you know, that we may not think about. You know, our brain is telling our body things to do even before we've had a chance to learn how to do them. We saw where it's pre-programmed to know the difference between night and day in newborns. that it was pre-wired to see words. Was another one of the articles we looked at. You know, the brain tells the baby how to cry. Nobody has to teach the baby how to cry. It comes into this world knowing how to do that. The brain knows how to make the fingers and the feet and the arms, all that move. May not have great coordination at birth, but you'll see those babies moving the fingers and moving the arms and blinking the eyes. The brain controls all that. And the child came into this world knowing how to do that. That's pre-programmed into the brain. It tells the baby to cry when it's born, when it's hungry, when it needs its diaper changed, when it's uncomfortable. It knows to cry. So there's a whole lot of things that the human brain comes filled with before it has an opportunity to learn these things. Well, the question is then, where did that information come from? Did it evolve from that primordial soup? Did it come from the dirt? Where did it come from? Well, no, it didn't come from any of those things. It came from, like we talked about, an intelligent source. Information always has to come from an intelligent mental source, and that source is God. Any comments or questions over any of that? Okay, we're going to talk about something that's right in my wheelhouse next. I'm kidding about that, and that's DNA. Any DNA experts in the room? Good. maybe you won't know if I get it wrong. But DNA is the initial for deoxyribonucleic acid. I don't even know if I pronounced
Is that right?
You did it.
But it is found in every living thing. It's found in animals. It's found in plants. It's found in viruses. It's even found in bacteria. So every living thing has DNA. And this DNA is an amazing thing. Again, we're going to focus more on the human aspect of it and what it does for us as human beings. But it is found inside the cell of a human being. Okay? Now, the DNA is actually found in the nucleus of our cells. If you look real close, it's going to be right in this area right here. Right down there in the very middle. Okay? That's where our DNA is contained, in the nucleus of our cells. And now scientists estimate that we've got between 30 and 40 trillion cells in our bodies. That was the most common estimation I saw. I did see some estimations as high as 100 trillion cells in our bodies. Okay? Now, for any one of us to have 30 or 40 trillion cells of anything that make us up, they would have to be extremely small. Okay? So we're talking about cells that are very tiny. And the nucleus of these cells that is even smaller than that. We're talking about very, very small objects. But this DNA is there in those tiny spaces. And the author says there on page 133 that the DNA in a single cell is approximately 6 feet long when stretched out. Multiply this by an estimated 50 trillion cells in the body, and it would stretch to the sun and back 600 times. You ever thought about, you've got something in your body that if it were stretched out, it would reach to the sun and back 600 times? Isn't that amazing? It has to be extremely thin. It's long. It's 6 foot. I'm about 6'1", maybe 6'1" and a half in my boots on. But so it's as long as I am tall. And we have, according to who you talk to, between 30 and 40 trillion of these strands 6 foot tall in our bodies. God has done an amazing job of engineering our bodies to be able to fit things like that we need in there. Any comments or questions so far? Okay? Now in this DNA, we find the code. Or we find the instructions, or we might call them blueprints, for making the proteins that that make up our body. We're making the proteins that make up our organs, our skin, our hair, all the parts of our body that are made up of proteins. The blueprints for that are found in the DNA, the code for how that's done. Now, I'm going to explain this to the best of my ability. We'll look at this as just a diagram of a small section of DNA. Now, what we see here, a little bigger on my screen, is DNA is made up of 4 different bases. Okay, it's made up of guanine, cytosine, thymine, and adenine. Now, those 4 pair up. Thymine and adenine always pair up together, and the guanine and cytosine always pair up together. So what you see them paired up there, and the sequence or the order or the arrangement of those pairs is what codes or what tells the cell how to make certain parts of the body, how to make the proteins. Those are the building blocks for the proteins. So when we look at this on this next example, to kind of give a brief and very simple description of what's going on, you have a strand of DNA, and in that strand of DNA, it will make a copy of itself. It'll make a copy basically of half of it, half of a section, and that's called RNA. That RNA then leaves the nucleus, goes out into the cytoplasm of the cell, and it finds the ribosomes. And when it gets to the ribosomes begin to read this code. And this code is going to be several characters long. And it'll start to read that code till it gets to the point that it finds 3 of the codes in a row, 3 of these characters in a row that will tell it to start. And once it starts, then it's going to start making amino acids. And every 1 of these characters tells it to make a different amino acid. And then it will continue on down that code, down that string of RNA that was a copy of the DNA, until it runs into 3 more of them that tells it to stop. So it's an amazing process, but each one of those things makes a different amino acid. When it gets to the end, from start to finish, it has completed the amino acids necessary to make the protein. Then those proteins are put together to make our organs. Any comments or any questions over that from anybody? Clear as mud?
And this is all occurring simultaneously. I mean, it's not like it's like it starts one process. It's happening with many of different of each cell basically.
Yeah, it's going on a constant basis.
Right.
A constant basis. While we're walking around, living our lives, this is going on inside of us on a regular basis. Okay. So that's that code that we see. That code is contained in that DNA and the way that those things are arranged. Now, this DNA, it's some amazing stuff. It has this ability to replicate itself with astounding accuracy. Okay, when we start replicating something over and over, and we use it for a pattern over and over again, the more you use it, the worse it gets. DNA is not like that. It continues to make itself, replicate itself with astounding accuracy. Every time a cell splits, you wind up with an identical DNA set that goes along with that new cell. The author points out there on page 134 that the production of proteins requires DNA, and the production of DNA requires proteins. Now think about that. Proteins require DNA in order to be made, and DNA to be made requires proteins. It's circular. In other words, one can't exist without the other. If you don't have proteins, you're not going to be able to make the new DNA that goes into the new cell. And if you don't have DNA, you're not going to be able to make the proteins that are used to make the new cell and make the new organs. So what he goes on and says there is, in effect, you cannot count on macroevolution to develop such a system, since the development of individual factors cannot lead to this system. Now, That's what evolution is. It's gonna develop one thing, and then it's gonna go to the next thing, and then it's gonna go to the next thing. The problem is, all of these things have to be in existence at the same time for it to work. And that's just not evolution. Everything needs to work together at the same time to function properly, and it does. A creator, designer, and programmer is requisite. And we know that creator and designer and programmer is God. Kurt?
It's interesting what that farmer, they said he called him a former ardent atheist in the middle of the page there, stated that basically bottom line, intelligence must have been involved in this. And in other words, what you've been saying, it's not happenstance, or you don't get nothing from nothing. That's him.
That's him right there. Yeah, intelligence had to be involved. He, as you mentioned, he was a former atheist. And evidently, some of the things that he learned from DNA, and learning about DNA, caused him to come to the understanding that there had to be an intelligent force to create these things. His name was Anthony Flew. And he's called the late former ardent atheist. What I think the DNA material has done is that it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements to work together. So here's a man that was an atheist, and he looked at this long enough that he come to the conclusion that there had to have been an intelligent power to get all of this started. Now, how far he went in that belief, I don't know. But at least he came to the belief that there was a God. Any other comments or questions? Right.
The two fellows that were instrumental in breaking the DNA code, I mean, they knew there had to be some kind of code because they were seeing how all the amino acids tend to be, work together, knew when to stop and so on. Watson and Crick. It's just amazing to me that they found this code, they know how intricate the design is, yet they still don't believe in God. I'm not even sure if they still believe in a designer, but I don't see anything missing.
Well, I think
It's just amazing.
I think those guys actually, after they made the discovery, come out and said, "Here's proof that there is no God."
You're right.
Yeah, they come out and said,
You're
"There's
right.
proof that there is no God." But the more they got into it, the more it just proves that there is a designer.
What year was it that DNA could be involved in who the father was, or who the murderer was, or who the rapist was? When did we start? When did that start? Because I know growing up, we didn't have the opportunity to have DNA to prove those type of things. But anybody know what year that was?
That was probably been the
According
late
to Google,
80s
it's
or
1985.
90s.
Plus in the
I was
80s,
about to say,
wasn't it?
according to forensic files, I think it was in the mid to early 80s.
Mid to early 80s. Okay.
She follows that closely.
I do. If you ever need to know how to bury a body.
That's good
Which isn't long at all.
No,
40 years or not 40 years. So that's conclusive evidence, isn't it?
it is.
Well, Watson and Crick discovered or determined the DNA molecule in the code, and that was only back in maybe 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
So we haven't known this for a long time. I mean, it was a major discovery when they broke the code.
Yeah, yes, it was. Anything else? Okay.
Another fact from Google. If you were to type 60 words a minute, it would take you 50 years to write the code out.
That is amazing. The amount of characters, it is an extremely complicated code. And it's amazing. It's a lot more complicated than any computer code. You know, the binary code.
How did they discover it then?
They used a lot of computers.
Yeah.
They used a lot of computer modeling. And I've been through it. It was amazing. I don't remember the details. Look it up, Dennis. Watson and Crick.
60 words a minute, and I guess a computer could type a lot faster than that. And so,
Processing.
Yeah.
so I wonder when they started trying to break the code. We don't know that either, do we?
No, I don't.
Yeah. What-
Probably not too long
What
after
was
they
it?
discovered it.
I don't know.
It's the year 2000.
Okay. Another fact about it, 99% of human DNA is exactly the same. 99% of my DNA and yours is exactly the same. What makes us different is found in that 1%. That 1% is what provides us with our uniqueness. Our hair color and our eye color and things like that is determined by the information that's found in DNA, in those little strands that we call genes. And those are inherited from our parents. And so if we have a certain eye color, certain hair color, something like that, that can usually be traced back to the DNA of our parents and their genes. But all that information is in our DNA. So if we have all this information in this very, very basic level of the human body, where did it come from? Did it evolve? Couldn't have evolved, could it? Because if it had evolved, where would it have come from? It would have come from matter. Really, it would have come from nothing. But we know that's not where information comes from, is it? It comes from an intelligent mental source. So we know that it came from God. It's also, as we mentioned, it's similar to, but much more complex than the basic binary computer code, all the ones and zeros. It's much more complex than that. Listen to this quote from Bill Gates. He says, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Now, I think he knows a little bit about computers. He recognizes that DNA is like a computer program, but it's far more advanced than anything we could have written. Now, if you stop and think about that, and I would say he's accurate in that. I don't think many people are going to say he's not. Where do computer programs come from? Somebody writing them.
A man wrote them.
Yeah, a man wrote them. So it come from a smart fellow, you know, probably average intelligence at least. Well, what about really advanced programs? Same thing, maybe from a guy a little bit smarter. What about really, really advanced programs?
Bunch of guys.
Yeah, a bunch of guys, yeah. You know, so it took a lot of brains, you know, to do that.
And no common sense.
That may be true too. So we recognize that when it comes to these computer programs, somebody had to write it. Well, what about the most advanced computer program of all? DNA. It just happened. It was an accident. No, somebody wrote it, and it was written by God. Any other comments or questions from anybody about DNA? Okay. We're going to move on from that then and talk about just real quickly a couple of other things he mentioned, because he goes over them pretty quickly as well, and that's the information in the cells. And what I'm just going to do on the information on the cells is quote. He just had a couple of quotes on that, and we're going to read one of those. I didn't know what page this was on, but it's a quote from Michael Behe from his book, Darwin's Black Box. He says there that biochemistry has demonstrated that any biological apparatus involving more than one cell, such as an organ or a tissue, is necessarily an intricate web of many different identifiable systems of horrendous complexity. The simplest, self-sufficient, replicating cell has the capacity to produce thousands of different proteins and other molecules at different times and under variable conditions: synthesis, degradation, energy generation, replication, maintenance of cell architecture, mobility, regulation, repair, communication. All of these functions take place in virtually every cell, and each function itself requires the interaction of numerous parts. We see all these things going on inside the cell, like Brian was talking about a while ago. It's going on all the time, and not just in one cell, but in all of our cells. And they're interdependent on other parts in these cells in order for these actions to take place. So we see these cells knowing how to do these things. How did they know? Well, they're pre-programmed by God to know how to do these He mentions molecular machines, and we'll go ahead and put the cilia and the flagella in there along with that. And all they are molecular machines that are designed to move microscopic organisms around. They're built to move things around. Look at, the flagellum up there. We talked about this earlier in the class, and Carrie did. But the flagellum is a rotary motor in bacteria that drives a propeller to spin like an outboard motor, powered by ion flow to drive rotary motion capable of spinning up to 100,000 RPMs. Now that in and of itself is astounding. You think about your vehicle. You're driving down the interstate. Depending on the vehicle, you're probably between 2,500 and 3,500 RPMs on your motor. If you really get after it and you punch it and it kicks into passing gear, you might get up 4,500 RPMs, maybe 5,000. You start pushing it past that, and you start seeing that little red line over there. This thing will do 100,000 RPMs. I don't know that we've got anything that would do that. There may be that I'm not aware of. But these things are far beyond what human beings are actually capable of designing. It says there, the fact that they're designed is undeniable from their structure. They have irreducible complexity, which we've talked about that several times through the class. If you take one part away, the rest of it won't work. All those parts have to be there at the same time in order for it to work. It could not have evolved part by part by part. They all have to be there together. But how do they know what they're supposed to do?
What is the durability?
Sorry?
What is the durability of it? Is it moving that fast?
I don't know how long they last, but they last long enough to do what God intended, I guess.
If you get your oil change, right?
Yeah. But, it's amazing, what they can do. But how do they know what to do? How does that flagellum or the cilia know when to move? Well, it's pre-programmed into it by God. That's information that God has already put into it. We don't have to tell it to. We don't have to tell it to do it. It just knows when. It's like that with a lot of other molecular machines. We mentioned ribosomes earlier in the cell. They're the ones that read that RNA and then takes that code and turns it into amino acids. They do a lot of work. But how do they know what to do? How do they know what to do? Well, it's programmed into them.
Well, and they're moving that fast, but yet I'm still sitting in this chair.
Better hold on to something. Anything else before we move on? This next thing I want to read is actually part of an article from Research and Revelation magazine. And that's put out by Apologetics Press. It was written by Dr. Jeff Miller, and the title of it is God and the Laws of Science, Genetics versus Evolution. And we're not going to read the whole article, and I will put some of it up on the screen here in just a moment. But he says here that several years ago, evolutionary scientists gathered in Mainz, Germany, and discussed some of the problems that had yet to be solved by naturalists. Now, he says naturalists, that's evolutionists. So a bunch of these evolutionists got together, and they're going to talk about some of the problems that they've got with evolution, some of the things that they hadn't been able to figure out yet. And he said the problems they had, and then he mentioned and still have not been solved today regarding origins, the origins of the universe, the origins of life. And he quotes a man named Klaus Doss. I guess that's how you would pronounce it. And I'll give you a little bit more information on him here. He was of the Institute for Biochemistry at Johannes Gutenberg University. Now, he wrote concerning the findings of the 7th International Conference on the Origins of Life. Now, this is this highly accomplished biochemist that has been to this convention about the origins of life and the problems we're having. This is what he wrote about it: that there was a further puzzle that remains, namely the question of the origin of biological information, the information residing in our genes today. It was still a puzzle to him, basically what he's saying. They didn't understand it. Where did this information, this biological information like we see in DNA, like we see in our brain and in other places, where did it come from? He says there, but we don't know how it got there. He goes on and says the Maines report may have an equally important historical impact because for the first time, this is still the same man writing, for the first time it has now been determined unequivocally by a large number of scientists that all evolutionary theses that living systems develop from polynucleotides which originated spontaneously are devoid of any empirical evidence. In other words, we don't have any evidence for what we've been claiming. Now the author of the article goes on and says here, in other words, no scientist has any empirical evidence that biological information could spontaneously generate. Now that's a problem. That's a problem for the evolutionists. If biological information, like it's in our DNA, if it cannot spontaneously generate, if it can't just come out of nowhere, then that's a problem for them because evolution requires the spontaneous generation of information. It's the only way it can happen with evolution. Without such a process, naturalistic evolution has no mechanism for the initial generation of information at the onset of life or for interkind transformation. So this idea that they don't know where the information comes from, the biological information comes from, they have no answer for that. And because of that, it absolutely rips the base out from under Darwin's theory of evolution. Any comments from anybody over any of this?
And you know, that also answers the theistic evolution. Because the theistic evolutionists, for the most part, say that God put everything here, started the Big Bang, and then walked away and let things evolve. Well, this says that they could not evolve because you had to have all those pieces together, not one created at separate times. Now, you know, so the macroevolutionists who this believes that there's no God and it just came from somewhere or anywhere, they struggle, but so do these, the theistic, because the same problem is still there. Is unless if there's a theistic evolutionist that said God not only created the world and all the matter in the world, but he put some of this together to start off with. They don't say that. They don't say that. I mean, then why not? Then believe in creation then, if you're going to say that.
Right. It knocks the footing out from underneath both.
Both of them, yeah.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Just you have your people who kind of explain what Brian's talking about. You have people who believe in just plain old evolution, like Darwin taught. Mm-hmm. And then you have people who believe in what they call theistic evolution, which they say God started all of it billions of years ago. He's the one that caused the Big Bang and then just let everything happen. And everything evolved from that. At least they recognize that there had to be an initial cause, but they're still far off the base from what the actual truth is. Any other comments or questions? Okay. He goes on then to what he calls the naturalist response. And he says, so how do naturalist scientists explain these clear examples of information storage systems and information programming? Creativity knows no bounds. And hypotheses, however ridiculous and unrealistic they may be, are innumerable. They just come up with all kinds of ideas. And I think we've had that mentioned a few times, that they just come up with anything and throw it out there and just see if it sticks. But we see that. But the one he talks about here is this Richard Dawkins. And of course, Richard Dawkins is a very famous atheist. He wrote that book, The Blind Watchmaker. In other words, if God created this universe, there's so many flaws in it, he's like a blind watchmaker trying to put things together, is the idea. And he is very condescending. He pokes fun at creationists, pokes fun at Christians, looks down on them, and he describes what we see in the universe as design as just it appears to be design. It has an appearance of design. But he came up with a program, computer program that he wrote, that he said was going to prove that you could have this slow evolution over time, that you could have this natural selection and this random mutation in order to bring about the world and the universe that we see now. And what this program did was it ran through a sequence of letters. It just took the alphabet, all 26 letters of the alphabet, and run them through randomly in order to try to come up with the sentence that he was looking for. He had a sentence in mind he was looking for, and it was a sentence from Hamlet, and it was, methinks it is like a weasel. That's the sentence that he was looking for, okay? Well, he run his program, and guess what? He come up with a sentence. So he said, well, there's proof. All this randomness, we run these random letters through here, and we can see over time that it would get better, and finally that it would come up with, what we see. It's kind of like the monkeys typing on the typewriter. If you give enough monkeys enough time banging on the keys of the typewriter, they'd be able to write some great book. But his test was flawed from the very beginning. It was flawed from the very beginning. First off, he says this eliminates intelligent design. But he had to have intelligent design to even begin the test by writing a program. We talked about a while ago, who writes computer programs? Well, his very premise, his computer program, had intelligent design behind it, okay? And not only did it have intelligent design behind it, but it had a stated goal. Now, evolution doesn't have a stated goal. Evolution supposedly just goes wherever it is taken, okay? It's not headed in a direct path. But he had a stated goal of reaching that sentence. And that's what he had in there. And he achieves that goal in a way that simply couldn't fail. I mean, the way he did it, it was going to come out. And I think all of us can kind of understand that when we see what he did. And I'll try to go through it real quick. He came up with this idea of methinks it is like a weasel. And we're just going to use the first few letters of that where it says methinks. And he took and he run all 26 letters and pulled one out randomly of each of them by the computer program for each one of those. And say the first time through, when he did them randomly, he got one letter right. He got that M right. So what did he do? Well, he rerun them. But this next time, he didn't rerun the M because he had it right already. Okay? And the next time, say he gets the T right. Well, what does he do? Well, he reruns it again. But he doesn't rerun the M or he doesn't rerun the T. And then he gets the N right. And we can see as he goes through this that eventually you're going to get each one of those letters right until you finally get to the point where you get the whole sentence right. Well, now that's a rigged game there. If you let me go to the casino and start pulling on a slot machine, and if I get the little cherry to come up or whatever it is these days, and I can keep that, and I can keep pulling till the next one comes up like that, and I can keep those two, and I can keep pulling, well, you're going to win every time. That's what this is. It's a rigged game. So,
You ever play Wordle?
do what?
You ever play Wordle?
No, sir, I have not.
That is right there.
All right. I appreciate the comments and questions. We'll see y'all Sunday morning.
You a Wordle guy?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a Wordle guy.
You just told me it was yesterday. She's doing great.
that-
deal thing was so
Definitely.
cute. I've never heard of that video.
Glad to see you, brother.
You know, I thought the same thing, I said, well, they're not doing it right now, is it? We have one. But
I know.
they have ways to catch up with Martin.
I don't know.
He's, got a little bit of a
Really
cold. That's me too. I'm not nearly as big as I used to be.
How's that?
That was a hard guy for me to stay.
That was the hardest one for me. It really was.
I read it and I went, oh, I got a headache now.